want to look at another issue in creating feature patterns. So I'm going to start a new metric part, and I'll start my first sketch on the XY plane. I like to turn on the visibility of the origin center point, and I'll start to sketch some geometry in here. And I think I'll start with a circle at the origin, and I would like to dimension that circle as a radius. If I go to dimension a full 360-degree circle, it defaults to a diameter dimension, so I'm going to right click and tell it dimension type, and I can force it to a radius. And so I'll put in a radius of 50. Okay, so I have my dimension in here, and I'm going to draw a couple of other circles in here. So I'm going to put a circle up here, and I'll put a circle up here. Now I'd like these circles to all have the same radius, so I'm going to use a crossing window and select these circles. I missed that one, so I'll hold down the control key and select that, and I'll set those to be equal. And then I'm going to draw some lines in here, and we saw before that if we hold the mouse button down and don't let go of it, it does a tangent. And so I'm going to come up here and get that tangent, and then I will get this one tangent up to here, and whoops, I missed it. And then I will do this one tangent back down to here. Now if I missed any of the tangents, I can put them back in here. So I'll do a crossing window and select those and get that tangent. So I have this one tangent. I think I have this one tangent. We'll find out in a minute here if I missed any tangents. If I highlight it, it shows me that it's tangent. I want to trim this, and this out. So I'll hit X on the keyboard. That takes me into trim, or I can come up here and click on trim, and I will then trim those arcs out. And I'll go in here and put some dimensions, and I'm going to dimension between these 2 points, let's say 185. I will dimension between this point and this point, let's say a vertical dimension of 125, and I will dimension the horizontal distance between here and here, let's say of 175, and the horizontal distance between here and here of 270. Everything turns dark, so I know that it's fully constrained, and down here it tells me that it's fully constrained. If it wasn't, if something didn't turn dark, I would start dragging points to figure out what I need, and most likely it would be a missing tangent constraint in this case, but I'm okay, so everything is fully constrained. Alright, I'm going to put a point at the midpoint of this line. So I'm going to come along here until I find the midpoint, and I'll put a point right there. And let's zoom in on that location, and I'm going to draw a line parallel to this line. And if it doesn't show you automatically that it's going to do parallel, just come up and scrub the line. Don't click on it, just scrub it, and then notice now that it's going to do that parallel constraint between those two lines. I'm going to draw a line from this line to the midpoint of this line, and then I want this line to be perpendicular to that line, so I'll do perpendicular this line to this one. What I did by setting this perpendicular into the midpoint, if I drag this, it's always going to go that same distance on either side of that line. I'll draw another line. I'm going to come out here like that, and I'll draw a line over here like this, and then I'm going to I have the long line going across there, but I'm going to draw another line over top of that line, and I'm going to change this to construction, and I'm also going to change it to a center line. Now I don't have to change it to a center line, I just like to. And then I'm going to do symmetry, and so I'll select symmetry, I'll select this line, and then the center line. By doing that symmetry now, if I drag one of these corners, you know, it stays symmetrical that way. If I drag one of these corners, it stays symmetrical that way. And I'm going to dimension and the angle between here and here as 29 degrees. I'm going to dimension the distance from here up to and I prefer to get the short line here, and so I'll do right mouse button select other, and I can get that short line, and I'm going to do that as a distance of 20, and then I'm going to put a construction line across here from the midpoint of this line over to the midpoint of that one. Let's change that to a construction line, and I'll add another dimension, and I want the align that's giving me the horizontal distance, so I'll right click and tell it to give me the align dimension, and I want to make this dimension a function of this dimension. So I'll just come up here and I'll click on this dimension, and now it says that dimension is a function of that one. So if I change this one will also change with it. Alright, so let's look and see what I want to do with this. I'm going to exit sketch, and I'm going to rotate around a little bit, and I'm going to extrude this mid-plane, let's say a distance of 20, and let's make that 30. Okay. Alright, so I've extruded that. Now I'm going to make that sketch visible again, so I'll come over here and I'll right click and turn on the visibility of that sketch. I might not need to see the dimensions anymore, so if I don't need to see the dimensions, I can right click here and turn off the dimension display, and so that clears up my screen a little bit so I can see what I'm doing a little better. And then I'm going to do an extrusion, but this time when I do the extrusion, I have a choice of doing an output of a solid or surface. I'm going to tell it to do a surface, and I'll select this curve on the outside, and I'll do that mid-plane, and I'll say OK to that. And notice it gives me this clear body, this surface body, and over here in the browser now it says solid bodies 1 and surface bodies 1. So I have a surface body and a solid body within this file. Now I want to make a tooth belt or something representing a tooth belt, so I'm going to pattern this around this curve. Now a lot of people have trouble figuring out how can I do a curve driven pattern in Inventor. And so I'll start out with the rectangular pattern. So I'll tell it to do a rectangular pattern, and I'll tell it the feature that I want to pattern is that first extrusion, and then for my direction I'll tell it I want to go along that curve, and I might tell it that I want 30 copies, and then for the spacing I could put them 10 millimeters apart, or I could tell it fill say 100 millimeters of that curve, or use the curve length. And so I'm going to use the curve length. Now notice the preview, it's shifted over here, not where I intended to follow that path, but notice this green dot here. That's where it's picking up and offsetting the distance from here to here. It's offsetting everything over that distance. So I'm going to expand this dialog box, and I'll get the selection tool for the start point, and instead of starting over here, I'm going to select at this, I put this sketch point there, I'm going to tell it to start at that sketch point. And I'll go ahead and say OK, even though I don't have exactly what I want just yet. But notice now that all of these objects are oriented in the same direction, and that isn't really what I wanted. I want them to align themselves as they go around that curve. So I'll edit that feature pattern, and I will expand that dialog box again, and I'll tell it to adjust to direction 1. And so now as it goes around the curve, it reorients each one of those copies to give me the results that I was after. And then what I'll do is I have this surface body that I will do thicken on that surface body. I'll select that surface body, and I'm going to tell it to thicken this, let's say 3 millimeters, and I'm going to go mid-plane on that. And so I'll say OK to that, and actually I only got that first surface, and that's not what I intended, So I'll undo that, and I'll do the thicken again. And so we'll do thicken, and this time I'm going to, so I had it on face, and it only selected that single face, and you see when I put the mouse up here, it highlights that only that single face. I'm going to tell it quilt, and this time it will find that surface going all the way around. I'll tell it mid-plane. I'll say OK to that, and so now I have my representation of a tooth belt with the curve-driven pattern. So remember that on that curve-driven pattern, to expand that dialog box, make sure your start point is correct, and then set direction 1 if you want the objects to be reoriented as they go around the profile. I'm looking at this, and I decided, you know, I've got this sticking out here a little bit. I'm going to change that extrusion for the thicken, so I'll edit that feature, and let me give this a little bit thicker, and now we see that that is no longer coming out past these features are no longer coming out past my belt. Alright, so that was a curve-driven pattern.